Once upon a time, there lived a woman named Akuna, a respected teacher at one of the most prestigious schools in the state. Graceful and composed, she was the kind of teacher every student adored for her patience and gentle nature. Her calm, soothing voice could settle even the noisiest classroom. Parents admired her for the discipline and warmth she brought into their children's lives. But behind her calm demeanor was a secret she had carried for years, one that tormented her in silence. Akuna was addicted to drinking her own urine. Each day, after the school bell rang and the students had gone home, she would quietly relieve herself and drink it, as though her life depended on it. The taste, sharp and metallic, brought her an odd sense of comfort. It was a compulsion she couldn't explain, a habit that somehow became her escape, her coping mechanism. She kept it hidden, terrified of what would happen if anyone ever found out. She knew society would never understand or accept something so bizarre. So Akuna lived in isolation. She never dated, never let anyone get too close. She avoided friendships and lived alone, wrapped in the safety of secrecy. The men who tried to approach her were always turned away. She built emotional walls no one could climb. Even though all her sisters were married, including the younger one she had cared for since their mother's passing, Akuna felt nothing. No jealousy, no sadness. Only relief. She didn't want to explain her addiction to anyone, least of all a man who would look at her with judgment. But like all secrets, hers didn't stay hidden forever. One day, after class, she stood by the door watching students gather their things. Then, in a flash, something unimaginable happened. Jaden, one of her students, grabbed her water flask on a dare and took a huge gulp before she could stop him. Her eyes widened in horror as he threw it down, screamed, and vomited right there in the classroom. The smell was unmistakable. The room filled with a sharp odor, and silence followed. A silence heavier than any scream. Shock swept across the students' faces as they realized what had just happened. Whispers broke out. "It's pee. Miss Akuna drinks her own pee," they murmured just as the principal walked in. Chaos erupted. The principal called her to his office. She tried to explain, it wasn't meant to happen. Jaden drank from the flask without permission, but it didn't matter. He asked her to go home until further notice. Akuna packed her things and left the school in silence. But the incident didn't stay within the classroom walls. Students had recorded the entire moment. By evening, the audio was online. Her name trended across platforms. Hashtags exploded. She was labeled the urine drinker. Parents flooded the school with furious calls, demanding her dismissal. No one wanted their children learning from a woman they now believed was mentally unstable. Alone in her small apartment, curtains drawn tightly, she sat as the world outside tore her apart. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Messages came in, fake concern from some colleagues, cruel insults from strangers. Many called her a ritualist. Others said she needed help. But it wasn't until something worse happened that Akuna felt her life might truly be over. Jaden collapsed at home that evening and was rushed to the hospital. Doctors ran several tests, trying to understand what had gone wrong, but before they could make sense of it, he was gone. The news shattered everyone. Akuna was arrested shortly after. Everything exploded. Her face appeared on the front pages of major newspapers, and news outlets ran the story non-stop. Akuna, once a calm and respected teacher, admired by both students and parents, now found herself at the center of a storm. Shackled, accused, and shamed. Her wrists ached from the cold grip of handcuffs, her image plastered on every screen, branded a killer. The interrogation room was suffocating. 2 detectives sat across from her, eyes sharp and cold. One slammed a photo of Jaden lying lifeless in the hospital bed onto the table. "Why did you do it?" he asked. Her lips quivered. "He drank from my flask. I didn't give it to him. I didn't want him to," she said, barely holding herself together. "It was only my urine. I never meant for any of this to happen." Her voice cracked as she tried to explain how Jaden had acted on a dare, how she hadn't even seen it coming. But her pleas were met with silence. The officers didn't believe her. The public didn't believe her. Her family tried everything. Lawyers, petitions, media campaigns, but Jaden's grieving parents were determined to see her punished. They wanted justice. Days turned into weeks. Akuna remained in a cold, dim cell. The withdrawal clawed at her insides. Her cravings grew unbearable. Her mouth dry, throat burning, her body trembled in desperation. She curled up in a corner, arms around her knees, staring blankly at the wall, trying to silence the voices in her head. Then, a soft voice broke through the darkness. She looked up slowly. A woman stood at the cell door, a gentle expression on her face. There was something familiar about her. The woman stepped inside and sat beside her in silence before speaking. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked with a small smile. Ekuna blinked, her mind racing. The voice, the eyes. Then it hit her. "Last Christmas," the woman continued. "We met briefly. I came to your house." It all came rushing back. The memory surfaced clearly now. Her name was Bula, the younger sister of Jed, the man who had once tried to date Ekuna. He had sent Bula to deliver a gift, but Ekuna, always careful to protect her space, had barely opened the door. She'd thanked her politely, declined the gift, and shut the door without another word. And now, fate had locked them in the same cell. Ekuna's cheeks flushed with shame, but Bula remained calm, her voice gentle. "Don't worry," she said. "I'm not here to talk about the past or judge you. I'm here because I can see you're drowning, and I think I can help." Ekuna's voice trembled. "Help me? No one can help me. The world thinks I'm sick." "Maybe they're right." Bula shook her head. "I'm a psychologist. I know what addiction looks like. I know how shame eats away at people. But what I see in you isn't just guilt. It's self-hate." Ekuna turned away, her tears falling freely. She had kept the truth buried for so long, locked inside with no one to trust. But here was this woman, someone she'd once dismissed, offering her a hand. Bula placed her hand lightly on Ekuna's arm. "You can tell me how it started. No judgment. Just talk to me, like I'm your psychologist." Ekuna hesitated, then took a breath. For the first time in her life, she let go. She began to speak. The story she had carried alone, the truth that even her sisters never knew, it had all begun many years ago, when Ekuna was just a little girl. She wasn't the bright, confident woman people later came to know. In fact, she had always struggled with her studies. Her test papers were usually marked with red ink, and her report cards were full of failures. Her family didn't hide their disappointment. Her sisters teased her relentlessly, calling her slow and useless. They often laughed at her during meals, mocking her mistakes and calling her a dullard. Ekuna began to believe them. Her parents never defended her. They allowed the ridicule to continue, sometimes even joining in. But the worst wounds came from her father, a strict mathematics professor whose expectations weighed heavily on her shoulders. Whenever she failed an exam, he would glare at her from his wooden chair, voice cold and cutting. "What is wrong with you, Ekuna? Are you cursed? Even goats are smarter than you." She dreaded mathematics so much that she began to fear numbers altogether. The anxiety was so severe that once during a math exam, she collapsed, unable to answer a single question. That incident sent her father into a rage. He looked her in the eye and told her she would never become anything in life. Not long after, her mother passed away. Her sisters and she were left alone in the care of a father who had no patience for failure. He filled their home with different women, one of whom eventually moved in, a woman named Inadika. She brought along her son, Ken, who was Ekuna's age. Ken was sharp, quick-witted, and brilliant at school. Ekuna watched in silence as her father praised him endlessly. "Brilliant boy," he'd say, again and again, beaming as he talked about Ken solving a complex math problem in minutes. Then with cruel ease, he would gesture toward Ekuna. "Unlike this one, who can't even add properly." The laughter at the dinner table echoed painfully in her ears. Something shifted inside her that night. Determined to change her fate, Ekuna sought help. She approached a teacher at school named Aguna, who promised he could make her brilliant, but under one strange condition. He told her that drinking her own urine would unlock her intelligence. And he insisted that for every lesson, she bring a bottle of her urine and drink it in front of him. She was young, desperate, and too naive to question him. She believed him. If urine could make her smarter, then she would drink it. Every day. What she didn't know was that Aguna was a twisted man who took pleasure in watching girls humiliate themselves. He never touched her, but the damage he inflicted ran deeper than physical harm. He told her stories of ancient scholars who drank their fluids for wisdom. He said it with so much certainty that she believed every word. Each afternoon, she would sneak into his dusty classroom with her bottle in hand, her small body trembling. Oguna would sit back and watch with a faint smile as she gagged her way through the bitter liquid, whispering, "You'll be great. You'll be brilliant soon." Over time, her grades began to improve, not because of the urine, but because Oguna actually started teaching her properly. But by then, the habit was firmly lodged in her mind. Her brain formed a link between success and the strange ritual. She began to associate it not only with performance but also with comfort. It became a private coping mechanism, a ritual she returned to whenever fear or pressure consumed her. Even after she left that school, the behavior stayed. Before exams, job interviews, or stressful moments, she returned to it. And eventually, it stopped needing a reason. It simply became part of her routine, something that made her feel in control, something that no one knew about. Now, sitting in a prison cell, shaking as Bula looked on with quiet patience, Ekuna's voice cracked under the weight of her confession. "He said it would make me brilliant," she whispered. Her hands gripped her knees so tightly they turned pale. "I was just a stupid, desperate child. I believed him. And now I can't stop. It's the only thing that keeps me calm. I know it's disgusting. I know it's wrong. But I don't know how to live without it." Bula didn't flinch. Her hand remained steady on Ekuna's arm, her voice firm and kind. "Ekuna, what Oguna did wasn't guidance. It was abuse. He didn't just mislead you. He trapped you in a prison you couldn't see. This isn't your fault. The world may not understand, but that doesn't mean you can't be free. You can learn to let go of what he planted in your mind. It won't be easy, but healing is possible." Ekuna's tears came fast, not the quiet, hidden ones she had shed for years in the silence of her apartment, but deep, uncontrollable sobs that echoed through the cell. She cried as though something had finally broken open. All the shame, the pain, the fear spilled out like a dam bursting after holding back too long. And Bula stayed with her, holding her hand through the storm. Outside, the world still knew her as the urine drinker, the murderer, the disgrace. But in that cold prison cell, for the first time since childhood, someone looked past the shame and saw a wounded girl who had never been given a chance. Bula helped Ekuna understand something she had never believed before, that she wasn't beyond redemption. She reminded her gently that pain, no matter how unique it felt, was not something she bore alone. As she sat beside Ekuna, she gave her hand a quiet squeeze, then began to open up. "Do you know why I'm in here?" she asked softly. Ekuna shook her head, wiping her face with the edge of her sleeve, her eyes still puffy with tears. She looked at Bula, searching her expression. There was warmth in her gaze, but beneath it, a shadow of something unresolved. "I'm in here for a crime I didn't commit," Bula said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her fingers. "A man died. They swore I killed him." Ekuna's brows knitted together. "His name was Olamide," Bula continued. "We were supposed to get married in 3 months. He worked for his uncle, who ran a series of businesses in Lagos. One day, Olamide uncovered some documents, proof that his uncle was laundering money and involved in illegal trafficking. He panicked. Told me we needed to leave the country before things got worse." Her voice grew tight. "That same week, he was found dead in his apartment. Poisoned. And every piece of evidence pointed at me. His call records, surveillance footage, even his phone. They said I lured him home and spiked his drink. But I wasn't even there. I was with my sister that night, helping her with her newborn." "Didn't your sister testify?" Ekuna asked quietly. "She did," Bula nodded. "But the prosecution dismissed her. Said she was protecting me. Olamide's uncle had power everywhere. Police, court, even my lawyer. I was buried before I had the chance to defend myself." Her voice cracked. "The last thing he ever said to me was, 'Promise me we'll make it out alive.' And now he's gone. I'm rotting in a prison cell while the man who set me up walks free, richer and untouchable. They call me a murderer. A black widow. But all I ever did was love him." The cell fell quiet, heavy with their shared sorrow. Ekuna stared at her, tears welling again. But this time they weren't only her own. She cried for Bula, for the pain in her voice, and for the injustice that mirrored her own. In that cold, dim cell something changed. Slowly, with Bula's help, Ekuna began to break free from the grip of her addiction. It wasn't an easy process. There were days she trembled, days she wept without reason. But each time she faltered, Bula was there, helping her replace the need with breathwork, guided meditations, and long conversations that peeled back years of buried shame. Little by little, her craving faded. The once comforting thought of her addiction began to fill her with revulsion. What once felt like survival now seemed like chains she was finally strong enough to break. Prison no longer felt like punishment. It became a place of quiet transformation. Then one evening, her father appeared at the prison, older and frielier than she remembered. His shoulders had shrunk, his voice no longer cut through rooms, it quivered instead. He looked at her through glassy eyes, lips trembling as he whispered the words she had waited a lifetime to hear. "I failed you, Akuna. I broke you before the world ever had a chance to." Tears gathered in her eyes. Not because she had forgiven him yet, but because, at last, he acknowledged the truth. "If I hadn't humiliated you, ignored your pain, maybe you wouldn't have ended up in the hands of that predator. Maybe none of this would have happened." She drew in a deep breath, her voice quiet but steady. "What's done is done, Papa. I can't carry your guilt and mine at the same time. I just want peace. Real peace." He reached for her hand, the same hand he had once ignored, and held it gently. "You will have it. I promise. I'll fight for you now. I won't just stand by and watch." And for the first time he meant it. Shortly after, Jed, Bula's brother, returned from abroad and took up both cases. He had always dreamed of reconnecting with Akuna, but seeing her behind bars, sharing a cell with his sister, was never something he could have imagined. He hired the country's best investigator. The man uncovered the truth behind Olamide's death, how his uncle had orchestrated everything to cover his own crimes. The missing surveillance footage was recovered, showing two of the uncle's men entering Olamide's apartment hours before his death and leaving with a duffel bag. The falsified logs and planted evidence were traced back to a corrupt officer on the uncle's payroll. With this new evidence, Bula's case was reopened, and her name was finally cleared. Her accuser was arrested. Meanwhile, the same investigator began digging into Jaden's case. What he found buried in hospital records was devastating. Jaden had been sick for years, born with a condition his mother had kept secret. The day he died was from an acute crisis, unrelated to Akuna. His mother had bribed doctors to hide the truth and let the lie spread, using Akuna as a scapegoat to protect her own reputation. Within weeks, both women walked free. Though the world still whispered, calling Akuna the urine drinker, she no longer flinched. She no longer shrank beneath those stares. She had survived. She had healed. And somewhere along that road of pain and rebuilding, she found something she never expected: love. When Jed met her at the gates, his eyes weren't filled with pity or judgment. They held only quiet understanding. Acceptance. He stepped forward and opened his arms. And for the first time, Akuna let herself be held. She was free, not only from bars or shackles, but from the addiction that had defined her for so long. Bula stood nearby, watching them. She remembered the day she had knocked on Akuna's door years ago, carrying a gift from her brother and being turned away. Life had taken all three of them through paths of pain, but now, somehow, they were beginning to rebuild something beautiful. There was no rush to prove anything to the world. No hurry for marriage or expectations. Just trust, understanding, and the slow mending of Akuna's life. Jed became her shield against the world's whispers. And Akuna found power, not in hiding her story, but in standing tall within it. Because in the end, what this story shows is simple yet powerful. Life can bruise us in places no one sees, break us in ways that feel impossible to repair. But healing begins the moment we choose not to be ruled by shame. Akuna's journey teaches us that judgment often comes from ignorance. And though people may try to define us by our past, their words only have power if we give it to them. It also reminds us that sometimes healing doesn't come from the places we expect. It comes from strangers who see our pain and choose to stay. And most of all, it shows us that labels fade, but the strength we build within ourselves can carry us through anything. Even in the darkest places, there is still room for hope, for freedom, for love, and for a new beginning.